If I become the most famous person in that industry, if I win enough awards, then I'll feel good about myself. After 6 years and 1,000 movies, in 2012, I won Performer of the Year.
So you're holding this award. What thoughts are going through your head?
I thought I would feel validation, peace, I'd feel joy. But I didn't even go to the award show because I was so crushed by it not feeling like how I thought it would. And at that point, that's when I made a very detailed plan to take my life when I got back home. I slide the check across the counter and I'm shaking. I'm, moments away from taking my life. And she looks at me and says,
Hey guys, welcome back to the Lila Rose podcast. Today we have on the podcast Joshua Broome, who has an incredible and a crazy story. He was one of the most successful male pornography actors for years, starring in over 1,000 films, actually, before he had an incredible experience that made him change his life dramatically. Now, Joshua is a pastor, a speaker, an author, as well as a husband and a father of 4 kids. His story is incredible, and it's very, very eye-opening. Of course, if you're listening to this episode with kids, this has some very mature content, so be warned about that. It's not super graphic, but this is an extremely serious topic of pornography, addiction, the porn industry, conversion, depression, and so much more. I hope you enjoy this episode. As always, thank you so much for subscribing to the show. I really appreciate it. We hit over 100,000 subscribers recently, which was a very exciting milestone. I love doing this show. I love hearing from you guys. Thank you so much for supporting the Lila Rose podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Good Ranchers. Good Ranchers is the #1 meat, poultry, pork, and seafood company in America. All of that delicious food is sourced directly from American ranchers, and you can know exactly the quality of the meat, the pork, the poultry, the seafood that you are getting. So check out goodranchers.com today. My husband and I love their steaks. We love their chicken breasts. It's really top quality meat. You're not going to find meat this delicious in your grocery store. Do yourself a favor, order yourself a box or a subscription from goodranchers.com today, and you can use the code Lila at checkout for $15 off your order. That's the code Lila at checkout at goodranchers.com for $15 off your order. Joshua, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
So glad to be here.
When I first heard about your story, I was just inspired. And I thought, who is this person? What has God done with this person's life? Yeah. It's incredible. And everyone needs to hear your story and the advice I think you have to give. I know many people have heard it, but I don't know if all of my listeners have. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'm just so honored to be here, and thank you for everything that you spend your life doing. It's so important, and I just want to honor you and say thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're on the same team.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so, for those that haven't heard your story yet, I want to start with the beginning. Long ago, you'd go on to become one of the most famous adult film, as they call it, pornographic male actors.
Yeah.
We're going to go to there, and now you are leading a thriving ministry and business and family and changing the world with your story and your testimony. Where did this all start? What was Joshua like as a child? And let's start from the beginning.
Yeah, ironically, it started with my mom choosing life. So my mom had me at 16, and there was conflict between her and my father, and I don't know the full story, and I don't need to. I just know that my mom made the right decision.
Was he a teen too?
Yeah, so they were both 16. So my mom had me when she was 16, and we're in a really small town in South Carolina, like so small. There's one convenience store, one gas station, one grocery store, and I say that to say, because that was true, as I got older, I would see my father. So I knew him to be my father in my town, but he was never my father in my life.
So he never, would you see him on the street and he wouldn't acknowledge you, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so I think there were times, again, I don't really recall them up until maybe teenage years, but I know there were times where he tried to reach out, and either there wasn't a full commitment on his part, or it was just too awkward. But I can really resonate at this point in retrospect saying a young man that was faced with shame as the same way I was faced with confusion and eventually anger on a daily basis. shame grows in the dark. And I can't imagine the level of shame after 5, 10, 15 years of that being true, and him knowing, I'm in this town of like 2,500 people.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's like I graduated with like 100 people in my class. So he gets married, and they have a good life from the outside looking in. They got, the home, the family. He has another son, daughter, and then they're living
in the same town.
in the same town.
And you're being raised by a single mom.
Yeah. So we lived in my grandmother's house until I was about 7. My mom got married to a horrible man that abused her, and there were drugs in our home, but that ended very quickly. But the only thing that I'd experienced was not having a father, and a really short example of the most extreme toxic example that you could possibly imagine. And then, we go back to just trying to figure things out on our own. So I'm seeing him live this life that looks very prosperous, and we're living this life of lack. But I say that in retrospect, because my mom was so amazing that I would have never known that we were struggling. I only know that because, what I know now. Because, I had, the opportunity to go to basketball camp. I had the opportunity to do acting classes. I did all the things that I know cost money, and somehow she figured out a way. So,
did you feel rejected by your dad being in the same town as him growing up, and he has another family, another son, everything?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say most people in general, specifically men, are high achievers. Most people who operate at a high capacity, achievement is something that drives them, and it's a good quality to have. If you're seeing yourself in the right light. But if you're seeking achievement for affirmation so that it covers up a, preconceived inadequacy that you have in your heart that's actually from a wound, you're trying so hard to do things so you can feel things, and that never works out.
What did you do with those as a kid? What did you do with those feelings of inadequacy and rejection from your father?
So I became a perfectionist, where I wanted to be the best in school. So I didn't want to make a 99. I wanted to make 100. I didn't want to make the basketball team. I wanted to be the best person on the basketball team. And I had to be the best. And it was, it was a good work ethic, and that's a healthy thing. And, excellence honors God. But I wanted to be excellent, and I had a good work ethic because I was striving for affirmation. So I needed to be affirmed, and I thought if I achieved, I would receive those things. So it was coming from a healthy place. Even though it was yielding a good result, it was coming from a dark place.
So were you feeling like, I want to prove myself to my dad that I'm a man?
Oh, certainly.
Even without him?
I also, I felt inadequate. So I almost wanted to prove myself to myself and prove myself to him and to the world, because I was really wrestling with, well, here's this man that's married and he's got 2 other kids and they're happy. What's wrong with me? So I took that and I placed it upon myself. So I'm like, if there's something inadequate in me, the achiever in me, I have to overcome it. And the way that I was trying to overcome was doing more.
Did you ever meet your half-siblings?
Yeah.
What was that like as a kid?
It was just a few times. I remember there were like a few awkward times where I found myself I went to his house, and it was always really strange. I don't want to spoil the story, but even now, I think when there's a long enough gap, it just becomes awkward. There can be reconciliation and restoration to relationships, but in my case, it was always I felt like he just pretended nothing had happened, and he just wanted everything to find some kind of level of normalcy. So the way he did that was just to treat me as if I was, my brother. And what was true is I had been in the same room as him less than 10 times in my life.
Wow.
He knew nothing about me, and I knew nothing about him. I knew things that he enjoyed because he portrayed them in his home, but I wouldn't have known those things because I knew him deeply.
So when you're sorting this stuff out as a high school student at this point, talk to me about the next steps that led you to Los Angeles.
Yeah, so
you're a small town boy.
Yeah, so I'm so back in the day, I'm going through a mall and they're doing like a model search, and someone comes up to me and asks me like, would you be interested in modeling? And my interest was more so acting, but I knew that kind of there was a lot of symmetry and a lot of stuff going like side by side with that. So I started doing that a little bit, and I actually had more success modeling than I had acting, which was somewhat frustrating. But it's like, this is what I want to do, but this is close enough. But I started doing that around like 13, 14, and that was my new affirmation of choice. That was my new dopamine hit of choice, where I would get the audition, or I wanted my comp card or my reel to be better than other people's. If I didn't get a call back, I felt so defeated. So that was my new, drug of choice. But that behavior continued. And then when I was around 13 years old, I was exposed to pornography. It was a magazine, and I saw it, and I felt confused. And for me, I'd never seen a husband-wife relationship modeled at all, and not in a healthy way. I'd never experienced having a father. I never saw anyone fathering. So this was the first real expression of intimacy between a man and a woman that I'd ever seen. So, that's why it's so dangerous. If your mind is conformed by the world and you're educated by screens and pictures that don't display the trueness of what intimacy is actually supposed to be, you only know what you know. So what I saw, I started to replicate, and I became very promiscuous with girls, like as a teenager, and that continued in college. And then I go to college to study theater and play basketball, but really just to do things. I wasn't pursuing an education. I was taking classes in theater because I thought it would help me become an actor, which is true, but it's like I didn't want to be educated. I didn't want to get a degree. I was just going through the motions, and that led me, to make a pretty easy decision. I'm like, well, if I'm in closer proximity to the industry I want to be in, then it would make sense. So.
And did you have your stepdad at this time? Was your mother, you said, remarried?
So this was So this was just from like 7 until like 12. Okay. So it ended pretty quickly. So he was never an authoritative like figure in my life. Never spoken to my life. Like unfortunately, the memories that I have of him is him on meth, like siphoning gas out of our car in the middle of the night, and hurting my mom, and her trying to cover up bruises. Like, that's all I remember about him. But I mean, I think that almost like reintegrated like negative thought processes about me, because my primary value as a kid was I took care of my mom, and now I couldn't even protect my mom. So that was really hard. And that's something, honestly, I still struggle with today. Like, feeling like I need to protect my family. I need to protect my mom. If just people that I care about, that's a fear that I struggle with, not being able to protect the people that I care about most.
When you were a kid, did you ever, and you were seeing your mom go through that, did you ever say anything to her?
Certainly.
Did you guys ever have a conversation? What was that like?
It was just very deflective. She didn't want to deal with it. She didn't want it to impact me. And that was my mom's behavioral patterns as a whole. Like, we have financial problems, she would just cover it up, or work harder, or do more. Or she was always someone, like if she was going through something and she really needed help, she would help others to almost distract herself from that. She's an incredible person, like loves people. But I think almost like the gift that she has to serve people well, misappropriated, you can use that to cover up things that are going on in your own life.
So what during the process, you see porn for the first time.
Yeah.
And then you said you become promiscuous. You end up going to college, kind of going through the motions, and then you want to go where the industry is. What was your relationship like with your mom during that time?
It was okay, not great. So the most beautiful thing, in my opinion, the only beautiful thing that came out of her marriage was my brother Michael. And so he was going into his senior year. And as I was moving out there, he was, actually he was maybe a sophomore, but he was in high school and, trying to be a good big brother to him. And I felt, conflicted about that, but not a lot of conversation with my mom about the things I was doing. I would just do them, very reactive. So I just there wasn't like, hey, Mom, I'm thinking, what you would expect someone to do is like, hey, here are some options on the table. I had talked with representation. I've signed with an agent. She's already got some stuff lined up for me. I've already talked with someone. I've got a place to live. I should have shared those things with her. I didn't. I just kind of called her up out of the blue. I'm like, hey, I dropped out of college. I'm moving to LA.
How old were you?
I was about to be 22.
All right. So you get to LA and your goal is acting, you're doing modeling.
Yeah.
Okay. How does this turn into entering into the porn industry?
Yeah. So
these are big. There, for some, maybe that's not a big difference because you can do kind of, soft core stuff even in Hollywood. But it's also it is a different industry.
Yeah, so I mean that was almost how I transitioned into it because I was saying yes to some stuff with HBO that was not far from porn, and then I had done some photography that was like not nude but as close as it could possibly be.
How did that feel doing that stuff?
Honestly, it felt like my conscience progressively justified it. So it wasn't that big of a deal. And to be honest, because the way that I was living, I very promiscuous with girls, not, I didn't think about that. So because I was accustomed to living that way, when I was being, asked if I was okay with doing these things, I was like, sure, because these are things I'm already doing in my private life anyway. So kind of the segue was I was saying yes to things that were somewhat shady. And I was, to kind of, mitigate my income, just like most people. It's like I was working at this place where they don't take resumes. You take headshots to this restaurant. And in the middle of West Hollywood, Saddle Ranch Chop House, there's like a mechanical bull in the middle of the place, and just one of those places, it's like a restaurant until it's not, and then it's a crazy bar. But I was working there, and 3 girls walked in, and pretty much they were asking me, hey, do you want to be an actor? And I was like, sure. And like, well, we're talking about pornography. And I was like, what?
Did you feel offended or flattered?
Both. I felt offended because like my reasonable part of my conscience was like, if you do that, you're going to burn, so many bridges. And like, yeah, I knew in my heart, like, this is not a good thing. But at the same time, I felt flattered because they asked. And there was this part of my identity that I was wrestling with. It's like, am I ever good? Am I good enough to ever like truly make it? And then I thought, well, I don't know. And I was already living this way. So the only thing difference was there was a camera and a check. So I said yes, thinking that what big deal? Like, it wouldn't be a big deal. And this was before, like, media was very different. Like, this is like 2006.
So this is like pre-Facebook, or right at the beginning.
This is when MySpace is like at its peak. So this is.
And so there's no OnlyFans, there's no TikTok, there's no Instagram. So in a sense, there was a little bit more maybe feeling of anonymity.
Yeah.
Around, hey, I can do some maybe porn scenes, but that doesn't mean my whole social network immediately will know it unless they're like looking at pornography. Was that kind of the sense?
It was my thought, but I was very wrong. So I did one film and it went somewhat viral. And
what was that like, the lead up to that? So you're talking to these girls in a bar, you agree to do it. Yeah. Are they involved in porn too?
So they were headhunters.
Okay.
Yeah,
so they just go to restaurants and find
girls and
aspiring
guys.
Models and actors and just pick them up for porn.
Yeah, they're pretty. So the way they do that is like, hey, we would love to introduce you to our agent. And it's interesting that, I think that it's such an interesting thing to look at because like the coercion that happens within language, like if you call something different than what it is, and there's a layer of like familiarity to it, it could lead to compromise. Where if you called things what they were, you would be shocked by them.
Why? What did they call it?
Well, they were just saying that, well, for them, they were using familiar language and that, hey, we're going to introduce you to our agent. And just the fact that it's called the adult film industry. It's like, is that acting like an adult? Certainly not,
And there are these like actual films that require writing and art and, beautiful production in the same way other films do.
Right. But
to make it the same.
But that's how he kind of got me, though, because so I go to this office and I was thinking, okay, this is going to be like this sketchy situation. I'm going to like go to like a Motel 6 and there's going to be a guy like picking lint out of his belly button or something like super weird. And I'm just going to get out of there. But it was in Studio City and it was adjacent to like where Universal Studios is. And it was in this big, beautiful business complex. And I walk in and there's this English guy sitting there and he had like a big double Windsor tie. And he asked me 3 questions. He said, what are you doing in LA? What did he say? How did you grow up? What are you doing in LA? And what do you hope to accomplish? And I said, well, pretty much it was just me and my mom. And
he's thinking, bingo.
Sure. Like he's asking for, ammunition to manipulate with. So yeah, like broken home. What are you, why are you in LA? It's like, I want to do acting and modeling. And what do you hope to accomplish? Well, I would just say, be very careful if you find yourself saying what I said, I want to be famous. Because being famous is not a goal to obtain. It's actually a really clear indication that there's something broken in you that you feel like if enough people knew my name, if I make enough money, if I did enough X, Y, and Z, I would feel validated because I currently don't. So that's what that's saying. But that's what I said. I want to be famous. And he was like, great. He's like, I could make you really well known in this industry. And because you have an acting background, the industry is actually shifting and they're parodying movies and a lot of people are putting a lot of money into production and you can be the lead in all these films.
Wow.
So it would be so advantageous for you that you have acting experience and that's a passion of yours because we can leverage that to make sure you're the guy. And the sad part was none of those things were lies. All those things came to fruition, but just not how you would think. So I said, okay, I'll do one. Thinking that what you're saying is okay, but I'm going to do one. I'll try it out. What harm could it do to me personally? And then honestly, the way that I was living, he was like, well, the first thing we do is there's a specific lab that everyone goes to because we want to get, consistent data points. So everyone does full panel STD and AIDS tests from the same place so that we make sure that everyone's safe. So I was like, I probably could use to do that. I've been living a very, unclean life. So
thanks for the free test.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what I was thinking. Like, okay, great. And I do the test and everything comes back fine. And he sets up the scene and I get there. And from the time that I got there, it was so much different than what I thought. Because I thought, back at this time, it's like, I didn't know anything about a camera other than like a handheld, like little, $100 Canon. And I walk on the set and there's a receptionist and she said, fill this out. This is how you get paid. And I saw, filled out like a W-2, W-4, whatever. And then filled out this contract. And I signed my name a bunch of times, but I didn't read it. I was nervous. I wouldn't think, I was like, okay, I'm going to have sex with someone and they're going to pay me.
Do you know what it said, that contract?
Well, now I do.
What did it say?
Well, ultimately, you're signing away so you're signing an independent contractor contract, and also you're signing away all rights to any images, sound bites, or video. In addition to that, the last signature was that they can sell that content parsed as many times as they want to as many third parties as possible, and it doesn't have a limit. So meaning that I've done 1,000 movies. I did 1,000 movies in 6 years, and it's been parsed into 100,000 pieces of content sold to, there's dubbed versions that are in different countries. They're played in hotels. My likeness is on, not as much anymore, but my likeness was on sex toys, posters, dating websites, fake profiles, and all this stuff was everywhere because there was this level of, well, even though it was my face, it was tied to a fictitious name. And that in itself should point to the level of shame in that industry, because the first thing you do, he said that I would make your name famous, yet the first thing I did was surrender my name and choose another one. So that in itself, if you to the person saying, I love what I do, why is the first thing you do is you change your name? That points directly to shame.
All right. So you guys, I'm very picky about my skincare. I always have been. I tried a lot of products, high-end products, low-end products, all different kinds of products over the years. And it's been very hard for me to find a line that I like, multiple products, and I'll keep using. And that's why I'm so excited to share about Nimi Skincare. Nimi Skincare first caught my eye because it's a beautiful brand. They've got great sourcing of their ingredients, but they're also a pro-life, pro-family company. So when I tried their product for the first time, I was surprised to discover that I love using Nimi Skincare. I love their moisturizer, which I use every night. I love using their vitamin C scrub. I love using their sunscreen. They have all kinds of other products. I think you're going to love Nimi Skincare. Give them a try. It's NimiSkincare.com. That's Nimi, NimiSkincare.com. And for the holidays, you can use the code Lila at checkout for 15% off your order. That's NimiSkincare.com. Support a pro-life, pro-family company. Try some amazing product and use the code Lila at checkout for 15% off your order. That's NimiSkincare.com. How much did they pay you for that first shoot?
Like $500.
$500, and they got everything. Unlimited use of your entire body.
Yeah.
You. So when you got there, and I'm guessing another female on set, did you was that awkward? Did you engage?
It wasn't awkward because we didn't. Well, it was awkward because we didn't engage. So I get there. She was taking like photos. She was doing like a strip tease or whatever. But I get there, and it's like a traditional set. Like I walk by, and then there's like a makeup room, and there's girls in makeup chairs. There's a bunch of bags in there. It's just like felt like a model shoot or almost like a runway show because like it was just super crazy. But then as I continue walking, a PA comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, I understand this is your first time. Here's a Viagra." Puts it in my hand. If you've never taken it before, I would bite it in half. But you've touched it. It's in your hand. It's yours. I'd never taken that before. I didn't know what to do. And then he's like, "We're going to need you in about 30 minutes." And the only thing that I had seen or anything I knew about the girl was that her IDs matched. Because like the first thing you do, they scan your IDs and you see her IDs and you have to sign that you saw that her IDs match her test, her STD test. So other than that, that was my only knowledge of who the person was. And then I go in the bathroom and I'm like looking at myself and I'm like, what have I done? And it's almost like the way that they set me up, or not set me up, but the way that it transpired was they picked me up in a town car and they brought me to this undisclosed location. And to leave, I would have had to be like, a kid that went to a sleepover that wanted to leave. I would have to call him like, "Hey, I changed my mind. I want to come back home." So I felt shame about that. I wanted to do that, but I didn't. And then I'm in the bathroom. I'm like, what am I going to do? And so I just popped the entire pill, chugged a bottle of water, and walk into this like sea of lights. And, it wasn't me holding a camera. It was like camera A, camera B, camera C. There was someone shooting BTS. There was a boom mic around my head. There was someone holding a sea light underneath me. And it was the most awkward, dehumanizing thing that I could possibly think of. I felt disgusting afterwards. I remember so clearly that there was like lube and all kind of stuff like on my legs, like in my leg hair, and then like in the bathroom in the shower, like they had like hand soap in the shower to take a shower. And I remember like trying to take a shower, and I remember just that ride home, like looking at that check, feeling so disgusting. And just feeling like the interaction I had with the girl, it was so far from anything that was intimate. Because I mean, literally the director is telling you exactly what to do, how long to do it, when to stop, when to start. You're doing it for the camera, not to feel good. So that's awkward. And then there's so much disconnect with this person that, like, if you're making eye contact, it's because the director's telling you to. But more often than not, it's the girl's looking at the camera to simulate the girl looking at whoever's watching it. So it's like you're just doing an act.
Just like you guys are like dolls.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sex toys. You are toys for somebody else.
Yeah. So that ends, feel disgusting. I was like, I'll never do that again. And then the scene gets a lot of traction, and my agent finds out. It's like, hey, I really like you. I think you're an incredible person, but we can't be associated with your likeness. You're fired.
Wow.
And then,
did you think that would happen?
No.
Was that a blow?
I mean, that was everything. That's why I was there. I mean, I loved what I did. Loved it. I love like everything about the arts. I love it. Then all of a sudden you're telling me I can't do the thing I love most, and the thing that I've been pouring my energy into, the thing that my mom made so many sacrifices to. Now I feel like, gosh, my mom's gonna be so mad. And then the worst thing possible happens. She finds out from someone. She, living in a small town, like something like that circling around, it's gonna find its way, to my mom pretty quickly. And then I have this really awkward conversation with my mom, her saying, hey, using all three of my names, Joshua Luke Broome, are you doing porno movies? Because someone told me at work that they had seen you on the internet doing this stuff. Is this true? And I was humiliated. And it's so easy for, people to, regardless of what situation you're in, like whatever, like crossroads you're in, if you believe a lie to be true, it's true to you. And you create a worldview through that lie. And I truly believed I was now bad because I had done bad. And because what I was pursuing, I could no longer do. The only option was to continue doing that. So I didn't.
What did she say to you when you said, yeah, that I did do that, Mom?
She said, I love you, but you're so much better than that.
How'd that make you feel?
Terrible. Because I let my mom down and I knew that she was right.
So at that point, you're faced with, you got fired from your agent. It's like the doors are closing on the stuff that you came there to do.
Yeah.
What, was there a door though? It sounds like the porn film was a success.
Yeah. So
then what happened?
So the agent calls me. He's like, I would love to sign you to a contract. I'd love to represent you. And like I was saying, it's like, well, the easiest thing to do is to continue to compromise. If you're living in compromise, the easiest thing to do is to continue to compromise. So I believed that was my only choice, even though that absolutely wasn't true. I was 22 years old. I could have done anything, But I decided, okay, I'm going to do this, but with the same mentality that I've had about everything in my life. Well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to become the best. And I'm like, well, if I make enough money, growing up, gosh, I hate to even say that I grew up in poverty because, I was with Compassion in El Salvador, seeing people with dirt floors and no indoor plumbing, and they're making like $300 a month selling pupusas on the corner. So I would hate to say that I grew up in poverty, but to me, from a Western context, it was poverty. So I believed if I made enough money, I would feel differently about myself. And I love numbers. I love statistics. So I tracked, well, once I make $1 million, I'll be happy.
Did you also think that I can help my mom? Like, this will maybe be a way to make it up to her. I'll have money to buy her something, help her out.
Yeah, I should have thought that way, but I didn't. I've never even thought that. I think that I was so self-absorbed and so ashamed at the same time. I thought that, okay, my relationship with her is fragmented in a way that it would never be the same.
Did you want to have a family at that time? I mean, you're entering full, like, hardcore into hardcore porn. I mean, that's where you're heading. Did you have any kind of vision of, like, I mean, you grew up without any models of marriage, healthy marriage, you know, single mother, she marries an abusive guy, divorces him later. Did you ever have a vision of beyond having wealth, maybe having a family one day, or was that not even in the equation for you?
It was funny. It was, I thought more about being a dad than I did about being a husband, because I wanted to become the thing I never had. So I don't even know, like, how practically I was thinking about that. I just knew that I wanted to become a father because I wanted to give the thing I never received. But I don't know. I mean, I longed for companionship. I longed for relationship, but I don't think that, like, marriage was something that I was longing for. But I like being like, you asked me, like, what are some of the things, if you had asked me when I was 20 years old, like, what are some of the things that are most important to you that you hope to accomplish? And I would have most certainly said, become a father. But, like, as I was in that industry, like, okay, if I make enough money, I'll feel a certain way. It didn't work. If I become the most famous person in that industry, if I win enough awards, then I'll feel good about myself. And, you know, after 6 years and 1,000 movies, I've made, you know, over $1 million. I've won 18 different awards. And in 2012, I won Performer of the Year. And that's, like, the highest award that you can win. And I thought if I won that award, because I'd been nominated for it 4 times, and this was the 4th time I was nominated for it, and I didn't win it 3 years prior, but I won it in 2012. And I thought, for some reason, if I won that award, I would feel validated in a way that was deep enough that would make the feeling of the same way I felt, like, when I saw my dad, that I felt all the time. I thought for some reason that would go away. And it actually made it worse.
After you won that award, what was that like? So you, up until this point, you've done several hundred films.
Yeah, over 1,000.
You've done over 1,000 at the point of the award. Is it an award ceremony? You go up and you...
Yeah, I mean, it was on,
physical...
like, it was on Showtime. You know, it was like an award show at the Bellagio, like in Vegas. But I thought if I won that, I would feel validation. I would feel peace. I'd feel joy. But it wasn't like instantly when it didn't make me feel like I thought it would. Anxiety was amplified. Depression was deepened. And I quickly started thinking about taking my life.
So you're holding this award. You go maybe back to your hotel room after the party. And what thoughts are going through your head?
What's wild is I found out prior to that I was going to win the award, because there was, like, a sponsorship, and I was supposed to, like, go to this place and the celebration afterwards and all this stuff. I didn't even go. I didn't even go to the award show because I was so crushed by it not feeling like how I thought it would. And, like, I was already someone that isolated myself. Like, I wasn't into, like, partying or drugs or drinking unless I was being, like, I didn't go anywhere unless I was being paid to be there. Like, if I was being paid to be in Vegas at a club to do a VIP experience or something like that, I would go. If there was a signing that I was being paid to be there, I would go. But I would never choose to go out or do anything. I secluded myself and isolated myself more and more and more. And at that point, I started thinking about taking my life, and I'd done a film in Atlanta, and I was flying back, and that's when I made a very detailed plan to take my life when I got back home.
During this time, and I want to talk to that moment of you getting home after making that detailed plan, but zooming back over those 6 years, you said you didn't have a lot of social life. You basically worked a ton. I mean, you're doing 150 plus films a year, sounds like.
Yeah, so I mean,
It's crazy, yeah.
Yeah, so working, pretty much, because in the industry, like, it kind of shuts down December and January because you're, just the way, taxes are still real, like in that industry. So you're trying to do all this stuff prior to December, and then there's the awards show in January. So there's prep to that. So really, that's in a 10-month period, so working 20 days a month where it was crazy because like like really thinking back, like looking someone in the eye in a normal interaction, like shaking their hand was terrifying to me. But I could have sex with anyone, anywhere, in front of hundreds of people because that had become so arbitrary to me and so like monotonous that it was just what I did. It was just really sad how like displaced reality had become.
Did you have any friends during that time?
Well, in the industry. And I mean, I think like something that attributed to the level of mental and emotional trauma that I experienced is, I'm still this jealous guy because I grew up, with a single mom. So I felt like I needed to protect her. So I was, if someone was talking to her or she was going on a date with someone, I was very protective. Mm-hmm. My mom tells the story of when I was like 9, where like a guy was talking to her in a grocery store and tried to throw like a can of corn at him or something. And just like, stay away from my mom. But having that same mentality, I was a jealous boyfriend, when I was in a relationship. So now you're in the porn industry, your friend group is the people in the industry because that's who you're around the most, and you're living in a way that is so different than the way that reality functions. You can't even really relate to people. So you're friends with people in the industry, and you're probably dating people if you're dating people in the industry. So I remember we were at dinner, and I was with the girl I was dating, and a friend of mine was with the girl he was dating, and I had worked with her that week, and he had worked with my girlfriend that day, and we're sitting there literally saying out loud to other people that we were in a monogamous relationship while we were having sex with people for a living. But at the same time, our friend group, we were suppressing reality to the point where we're not even acknowledging the fact that he had had sex with a person that I'm saying is my, my companion, my girlfriend. So suppressing that reality for me, feeling jealous, but having to press those feelings down, it was bad. It was really bad for my mental health. So I think that contributed to the level of depression, and unfortunately, that contributes to everyone in the industry because you're suppressing reality. You're saying, I love what I do. At the same time, you're believing, well, I'll never do the thing I actually long to do. Mm. The passion that I have is slowly dying inside because you have people in the industry saying, no one's going to date you. You're never going to be able to do this.
So like normal people won't date you.
Yeah. Like so, and it's almost like directors and producers, they would say those things because if they're telling you those things that you're already thinking, it's going to be so much easier to get you to continue to compromise. Mm. So, I mean, I've been out of the industry for 11 years, and there's been 30 people that I know that I've spent time with. I know their real names. I know where they're from. I know, certain things about their life that have committed suicide.
Wow.
And it's not like the industry as I knew it, it wasn't a big industry. You're talking a few hundred people. So 30 people believed, well, this is always going to be on the internet. This is always going to be who I am. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. So either the pain became so much that they took their life, or they medicated with some type of drugs to numb the pain to the point where they overdosed. So 30 people. And there's far more people than that have done that. There's just 30 people that I know personally. And literally every roommate that I ever had, dead.
And here you are, alive.
Yeah.
That girlfriend from that dinner or that lunch you had where you're acting out this monogamous relationship when you're all sleeping together on camera for money, Yeah. How did it end with relationships like that in the pornography industry?
I think it's really common or just people in general. Like, if your normal environment is chaos, you become comfortable with chaos. So more often than not, the way that a relationship would end would be I would do something or just decide like, okay, like this needs to be over because I can't feel emotionally attached to you. This can't go any deeper than that. So even though we would talk about the fantasy of a normal life and a fantasy of a marriage, but it was more like something you would dream about than something that it could actually be. And I think because that reality wasn't attainable in my mind. Like, if we got married, there's no way that someone could have sex with my wife. Like that was just like, it was just too much. Yeah, there were people in the industry that were married, and they were both in the industry, and that was just what they did. It was just work.
How do you think they sustained that? I did the Whatever podcast a few months ago with a number of other guests, and there was a couple there that were basically pornography actors.
Yeah.
And they say they're married.
Yeah.
They say they care about each other.
Yeah.
And they literally do pornography, sometimes together, sometimes apart.
I mean, I think, like, what's your definition of marriage? You know, I think it goes to that. Like, how do you see reality in what is, you know, the line in the sand? Like, where is your moral reasoning coming from? What does the confines of marriage mean to you? Like, you live in the same house. Like, is that what you mean? Like, there's a ring on each other's hands. You have the last name. But are you committed to a life of sacrifice for one another that's bigger than yourself?
They claimed it was emotion. It was that they kept their emotions for each other somehow. And they severed emotion from physical, even though your emotions you physically feel them, but that sex acts could be done with anyone. Doesn't really matter as long as they get paid for it. But their emotions of love were feelings of attraction, I guess, or restricted for each other. Well, That's how they described it.
Well, I would say, again, you know, if you believe a lie to be true, it becomes true to you, and anything can become normal to you. I mean, it's really sad the way that, you know, like, God has wired each of us to desire intimacy, but with Him. And when we replace something that's meant for us to interact with a counterfeit, we might feel something, but it's going to be so less than, we're going to need more and more and more of it. And eventually it's going to pollute the way that we think. It's going to pollute the way that we live. And even though we can say that something is true, we can't be slaves to our feelings, because our feelings are not dependable. There's no measure for our feelings. We might feel one way that one day, we might feel another the next. That's not a commitment, because a commitment is, I'm going to show up and do something that I'm committed to regardless of how I feel.
She talked about, Lena was the name of the woman or the wife, and she talked about how she had to numb herself to accept her husband, you know, sleeping with other women in front of her, basically.
Right.
And, you know, there was also, I think there was doubt, but I can see what you're describing so well, this sort of invincibility of unreality. Like, I'm going to just pretend so hard. Well,
and in addition to that, thinking about putting myself back in those shoes, if you don't say that, then what? Then your reality is, I'm stuck in this place I can't get out of, and I believe that I can't get out. Like, this is, I either have to say, I'm okay with this happening, or what?
Despair. What you're talking about is, if they don't live in that unreality, they'll just, what will they do?
What's overwhelming. And then, so you're wrestling with a belief that there's nothing else I can do. Like, once you do that, there's nothing else you can do. And you believe that your identity is tied to, you sell your body for sex. That's who you are. It's not what you do, it's who you are. And when your identity is attached to your behavior, you believe, well, if this is not true, well, I can't do anything else because I'm not valuable in any other capacity. So what am I supposed to do? I have to suppress reality, because what's on the other side of that coin is what? Death. There's literally nothing else I can do. So I have to say, I love my job. I'm okay with her doing that. And like, to your point, it's like she had to numb herself. She wasn't okay with it.
She admitted it kind of accidentally almost in the podcast, which didn't really get a lot of focus from the conversation because it went so many directions so quickly. But it was so remarkable to me. You know, it's like a moment of self-revelation of, I had to get numb for it.
Yeah.
But I love doing it.
Yeah.
It's like you love doing it, but get to numb yourself.
And it's like you are a walking contradictory, you know? You're a walking contradiction. And it would hurt so bad to admit that. It's almost like when you commit to a lie for so long, it's like, it's going to cost me so much to acknowledge that I'm living a lie that I'm willing to, even though I know this is not true, I have to keep moving forward because what's my other option?
Wow. The holidays are almost here, and now is the time to snuggle up with a delicious steaming cup of hot coffee with your loved ones. And of course, you should be drinking 7 Weeks Coffee. 7weekscoffee.com is America's pro-life coffee company. The blends are delicious. You're going to have these delicious roasts that are gourmet. You have different kinds. I like the medium roast Ethiopian blend. There's all kinds that you can choose from. But this is ethically sourced, organic, gourmet, low-acid coffee. 7weekscoffee.com is also a pro-life company. 10% of everything that they bring in, they give to pregnancy resource centers to help moms and babies in need. So anytime you buy a 7 Weeks Coffee, a delicious bag of coffee beans, you are directly fueling the pro-life movement. So go to 7weekscoffee.com today. Order yourself a delicious bag or bags of coffee. You can use the code Lila at checkout for 10% off your order. That's 7weekscoffee.com, and you can use the code Lila for 10% off your order. So it's 6 years. It's over 1,000 films. Was there a progression of the kind of content that you were involved in and the kinds of things that your agent and the people around you wanted you to do? Was it getting more and more hardcore? Did it go places that were increasingly uncomfortable for you?
Yeah. So like specifically like girls have a no list. These are things that I don't want to do. So they don't do them. And sometimes people I don't want to work with, but often it's like if you date someone for a while and ends poorly, it's like I don't want to work with that person because that would be awkward. But which is another conversation in itself. But girls will have a no list, and they'll have some time in the industry, and then things will slow down for them, and then their agent will go to the main studios and say, hey, how much will you give to see this person do that? And then the agent will go back and say to the girl, out of nowhere, this studio is offering $50,000 for you to do the thing that you said you didn't want to do. And I know you don't want to do it, but if you do it, you'll be relevant again. And they do it. And then the thing they said they would never do is something they do with normalcy because once they do it, it's just something they do. And once all those things are done, they lose their value. And then that's why there's so much turnover, specifically with girls in the industry. But for me, it wasn't pressure from my agent to do things. For me, because my mom was abused, and I saw that growing up, I refused to do anything that was violent. There's certain like studios that shoot things where it's like very aggressive. Specifically, there's a few studios in San Francisco that do like bondage stuff where like you're tying girls up and beating and all this stuff. So I never did anything like that because it was too traumatic for me, and just honestly I just thought it was wrong. But as I was in the industry, I would say yes to things like, well, if I'm gonna bartend, with my shirt off, or walk around in my underwear at a party, and I would get paid a few $1,000s for that. And that was something that I was doing, and escorting is something that is pretty common in the industry. And, for girls and guys, someone would, link up with your agent, and your agent would, you would be on this hidden website, and people could essentially buy a date with you, but it wasn't a date at all. They were paying for sex, and that person would take a test, and you would get a check. So it wasn't much different than what you were accustomed to. In that industry, you become accustomed to, well, as long as you're getting paid for it, it's justifiable, regardless of who it's with or where it is. And I found myself in a place where I'd said yes to being in being in a place in Europe, and I was there to bartend, and I wasn't really giving clear instructions what I was going to do. I just knew it was, I was there to, to look good with my shirt off and to serve people and kind of be, eye candy or whatever. But I was given drinks and drugs and ended up essentially being raped. And I was cognizant of what was going on, but I didn't feel like I was in control of what was happening.
Who was raping you?
So there were two men that, are, powerful people that have a lot of money that are documented of doing this often for over a 20-year period. And when that happened, I felt like it was my fault because I'd put myself in that space. And I tried to not, because when I engaged in anything sexual, I never really thought about it afterwards. Like really after the first time I did that, sex became something that, it was just something I did, and I didn't really attach any feelings to it, but this was different. So I felt, okay.
Because it wasn't part of the contract.
Right. I mean, even, and it was like, and it was weird the way I thought about it, because like, well, it was more money than usual. Like it was, it was like in the neighborhood of like $50,000. So I was thinking, okay, well, because it was more money than normal, it should be more justifiable, which is not right thinking, but.
Meaning you were like, they overpaid me for bartending, and the fact that they drugged me and raped me, it's hard for you to feel like it's morally justifiable for you to be upset about that simply because you got a big check, even though you never agreed to that.
Right. And then honestly, I mean, that's kind of who I was, because, that my value is tied to, well, people pay me for sex, to either watch me have sex or to have sex with people. And the reality is that, like, you're not attracted to the person that you're doing the scenes with. I mean, every once in a while, they'll be someone that, you would be interested in or have some kind of like small connection with. But that's best case scenario. 99% of the time, it's not someone that you're connected with. It's not someone that you would find attractive. It's not someone that you would approach to be in a relationship with. So there's this like, this separation from what is happening. And I don't know, I think that's the way I tried to justify it. But it definitely made me feel like, it made me feel a way that I couldn't really reconcile.
It kind of broke the unreality you were living in.
Right.
It sounds like something had happened that wasn't on your terms. You were raped by two guys.
Yeah.
And you couldn't really defend yourself from them. Like, you were at this thing, you were drugged. What happened after that?
Well, unfortunately, I went back. They invited me back, and even though I didn't really want that to happen again, I guess I was just okay with it in some way. I don't even really know, like, I've like walked through like some of this like with a counselor, and just it's almost like I can't put my finger on like what made me justify going back.
Do you think it was like a tendency to self-harm or humiliation?
Sure.
You were already at such a low point. You'd given up. You'd lost the things that you had first hoped for. You're now really stuck in the porn industry. And that was maybe humiliating. And it's like you're still almost going back for more humiliation.
I mean, I think that would probably can be true. It was, it was definitely a dark place to be. And then I started to get to a place where, I'm just not doing okay mentally. And then I'm wrestling with like, okay, I'm doing 20, 25 scenes a month. I've been doing that for 6 years, and it was just weighing on me, and I hated it. I hated doing it. But at the same time, I got a lot of affirmation because I was good at it, and made good money, and people knew who I was. Well, they knew that version of me, and I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And then I was just kind of like, okay, what else can I do? It's like, well, nothing outside of selling myself for sex. And this is like 2011, 2012. In the industry, pretty much the entire time I was in the industry, there's a straight side of the industry, and then there's the gay side of the industry, and really exclusively this is for men. Like there's a lot of bleed over that happens. Like there's the same, like straight companies shoot lesbian porn, the girl on girl stuff, but there's something like that was extraordinarily taboo about the gay industry. When I say gay industry, explicitly you're saying men, because that's not even considered the gay industry. Not then anyway. So often, anyone that was in the industry that was a good looking guy that was popular, all the studios were offering them like, name your price. And I thought, well, I don't necessarily want to do that, but I can't continue doing this. And I went through my emails and I saw like a lot of big numbers, and I thought, well, how bad could it be? And then if I'm doing that, I'm only going to have to do like one scene a month or 2 scenes a month. And that'll be so much better than like 20 or 25 scenes a month. And I make a decision to start doing that. And it was so interesting. Like everyone that knew me was like really shocked, because I didn't tell anyone that I was going to do it. I just responded back to an email, and I did it. And I just won Performer of the Year as, a straight performer. And I'd, been in the industry for 6 years, and I was the guy. And then when I did that, like my friends were hurt. Were like, dude, what are you doing? Are you gay? No. Like, why are you doing that? I didn't really have an answer. So all of a sudden, the little bit of a community I had gone, because it's a completely different industry.
And they're hurt because you're leaving business deals with them.
Well, no, like my friends, like, dude, why would you do that?
What were they judging you for that?
Not judging me, just like, I mean, just imagine like someone like out of the blue, like do something that was so contradictory of who you knew them to be.
So did they feel kind of betrayed, like you hadn't let them in on?
Yeah, like why would you do that? Because like a lot of the guys in the industry that were in the industry, like they were coming to me like, how do you become more successful in the industry? How do you like create the relationships that you have? Because all the companies that would only hire like certain people, I was one of those people. So a lot of like the younger guys that were getting in the industry, it's like, how do I, will you mentor me? Like, how do I become, like you? And then you see this person do something that is not, doesn't line up with like who you know them to be. Mm-hmm. And really they're like so segmented that like immediately, because I didn't hang out with people, but I saw people on set because I was on set every day. So these were people I was around all the time. Then all of a sudden, I just didn't see these people anymore.
So you lost that community. You're doing now you're entering the gay porn industry because you don't want to be doing pornography anymore, but it would seem like your only option.
Right.
And what happens next?
I do a few scenes, and then I filmed a scene in Atlanta, and I'm on my way back home, and I'm on that plane, and I'm like, I make a very detailed plan to take enough pills to where I would die. And I remember I was sitting in my apartment, and I stacked the pills on the table, and I was like, okay, I take a lot of vitamins every day, so I know I can take a lot of pills at once. So like, here's these 3 clumps of these 3 clumps of pills, and I know that like I could probably swallow this many at once, and it's like it's enough where like I'm not going to chicken out. And I just remember I had this like giant payroll check like in my pocket, and it would just feel like it was just so abrasive to me. And I was thinking like, okay, this will help me justify it. And I opened the check, and it said something grotesque. Like the directors would always write something on the memo of the check, almost to be demeaning to people because they know you have to cash that check. So it would be some kind of grotesque title on the memo of the check, knowing that you would have to cash it or deposit it. And
Why would they do that?
I mean, the more that you mentally, harm someone and demean them, the more likely they're going to
come back.
Yeah. Because it's like, if I feel less than, I'm not going to change anything about myself because I feel like I'm not going to have the power to do so. And if I don't think I'm worth anything, I'm just going to continue doing what I've always done. So, but my plan was, I normally would go to the Dropbox or the ATM because I didn't want people to see what I had done. So I would just put that in the Dropbox. But this time, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the teller and I'm going to slide the check across the counter, and I'm just going to wait for her to say to me what I thought about myself to be true. And that was going to be my justification for me to go back and take the pills. And I slide the check across the counter, and I'm shaking. I'm afraid. I'm, moments away from taking my life. And she looks at me and says, "Joshua, are you okay? Joshua, how can I help you?" And at that point, it had been over a year since I heard my name.
Wow.
Because I was going by a stage name, and I had slowly, like my mom, my brother, my friends, over time, they were, "Joshua, I love you, but man, what are you doing?" Because that's the beauty of accountability. If I'm with, a friend of mine and they say, "Hey, you were speaking to your wife like pretty harshly. That's out of character for you. Are you doing okay?" I've got two choices. I either say, "You know what, you're right. I need to apologize to her, and I need to figure out what's going on with me because I'm not feeling right." Or, "Don't tell me what to do, and I push you away." So I was in a place where people who love me was trying to draw me out of that industry, and I pushed them away, and I hadn't even heard my name in over a year. And this person that I believe was prompted by the Spirit just was aware enough to see what was going on, and she asked me if I was okay. And that decision led for me, instead of taking my life, I went home and I called my mom and I said that I was sorry. And I was waiting on her to chew me out, but instead she said the same thing she had always been saying: "I love you. You're better than that. Please just come home." So I did. So I literally I packed up my things and I called about 50 different people, and I found someone to sublease my place, and I left everything I had in my apartment, and I took my clothes and a few things, and I left LA, and I didn't go back for 10 years. But while I was gone from the porn industry, what I brought with me was all my brokenness. And now I was removed from the affirmation. I was removed from the pain. But I believed, I covered up. I had a tattoo on my shoulder that I covered up. And I thought if I could cover up my tattoo and delete my social media and shave my head, I could just magically pretend like none of those things had happened. But because the way the internet works, I had the content still coming out and people saying, "Aren't you that guy? Aren't you that guy? Aren't you that guy?" I was one Google search away from everyone knowing the things that I was trying so desperately to hide. And I would just lie until I got found out. And that went on for about 2 years. I was working in a gym. I almost got fired because I didn't tell them the truth. And, I was working, in close proximity with people, doing personal training and stuff like that. So, they needed to know those things because it could be alarming, But I wasn't forthcoming with that, and they found out, and I didn't deserve them to be as kind as they were, but they set some boundaries, and they said, "Hey, I don't believe that you are the person who did those things. So I want to give to you, which I hope someone would give to me if I was in your shoes, so, another chance. So I worked in that gym, and 2 years into that I was trying to like put enough good dirt on my bad dirt so I didn't feel dirty. And, so got every, health and fitness credential that I could find, and got mentorship and got really good at doing the same thing I was doing in the industry. I'm going to become the best. I'm going to make money. I'm going to get, accreditation. I'm going to get people to tell me I'm good at the things that I'm doing. And I loved it because I loved connecting with people. I loved seeing people do things that they didn't believe they could do. But in walked this girl one day, and she was the prettiest thing I've ever seen. And I asked her on a date, and she shot me down. And I fell in love because she rejected me. But I was persistent, and she agreed to go on a run with me. And I was waiting on her to get there, and I just felt like in my conscience, like almost my mom, and I think maybe like the Holy Spirit starting to work on me. But I just felt like, don't you dare lie to that girl. Mm-hmm. And so the way that I took that is, okay, I'm going to save myself and her from a lot of agony, because what would happen is I would start a relationship with someone, and then they would find out, and then it would kind of blow up in my face. So I'm like, I'm just going to tell her up front, and then she's not going to have anything to do with me. And then, and she gets there, and I'm like, hey, before we start our run, I just want to tell you something. And to be honest, like I'd never really been honest with anyone like that. So it was almost like I passed out, and I told her like every bad thing I'd ever done for like 5 minutes. And she was obviously very taken back by that. And then after she processed for seemed like a long time, she looked at me and said, well, are you still doing those things that you said? I said, no. She's like, well, person's not defined by the worst thing they've ever done. And a person's not defined by the best thing they'll ever do. There's an author of life, God. He created you, and he determines who you are. Do you know him? And I was like, sure I do. Because I grew up going to church a little bit, and I thought to be a Christian meant that you acknowledged that God was real and he created everything, but that's where it stopped. And honestly, for me, I had no idea who I was. So I'd become very good at becoming the person across, whoever I thought that the person across from me wanted me to be. I call it a first date mask, where I'm going to become whoever I think you want me to be so that you like me, because I have no idea who I am. And that's the porn industry in a nutshell. It's like you pretend, or you try your best to act out these fictitious representations of intimacy, and you're a person that you're pretending to be someone you're not, and you're even going by a fake name, and you're playing a fake role, and there's so many layers of counterfeit that you don't even know who you are. And to hear her say that, it was pretty challenging. And then she pressed in a little bit. She's like, well, I've been following Jesus for a long time. My whole family is Christian, and I'm not perfect by any means, but my relationship with Jesus is the foundation in which I live my life. Do you like tacos? I was like, what? And when she asked me like, what kind of food do I like? Do I have any like long-term, short-term goals? And just like cared about me. And I was taken back by the way that she responded to me. Think about how like Colossians 4:6 talks about that your speech being gracious and seasoned with salt, how you might know how you ought to answer each person. And it was the way that she responded to what I said, where she extended grace, but also she told me the truth. And that's what love looks like. But I was just so captivated by her and curious about what allowed her to respond like that. And often, and then also like her looking what I thought my entire life to be true in the face and telling me that it wasn't. I believed that I was bad because I did bad things. I believed I was bad because I did bad things, And I believed that I was, inadequate because of the relationship I had with my father. So those are those things that I thought to be true. And she looked me in the face and said, those things don't define who you are. So we text for about a week, and then we end up in church, and I don't, I didn't think that I deserved or should have been there, but I was there, mostly because I wanted to be around her. And this pastor gets up and he starts preaching this sermon out of 2 Samuel chapter 9. He's talking about this dynamic between Jonathan and David. And historically, when a new kingdom was established, the previous kingdom was completely wiped out because they didn't want them to think they had access to this new kingdom. And, this dynamic between Jonathan and David was different. They were dear friends. And David asked, is there anyone remaining out of the lineage of Saul? And there was Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth knew history, so he was expecting death. And David sends his guard to go find Mephibosheth and brings him into his kingdom and gives him a seat at his table and even restores his land. And Mephibosheth is pretty taken back by this. He even refers to himself as a dead dog. He's like, who am I, to be in the presence of you? I deserve death. And the pastor kind of pivots from there, and he's like, well, you know what? Romans 3:23 says that we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and Romans 6:23 says the wages of sin is death. So guess who's guilty? Everybody. Guess who's deserving of death? Everybody. But there's good news that Jesus, being fully God and fully man, came into this world, and he was born of a virgin, lived a perfect life. He resisted temptation. He never sinned, and he went to the cross and he died. He died and he paid the debt for you and for me. And on the third day, he authenticated his identity as the Son of God, the Messiah, the one who takes away the sins of the world. And I'm hearing these things and I knew them to be true. And the Holy Spirit just really wrestling with me in my heart. But what I was struggling with was, why would God in flesh die for me? My own dad didn't want me. The things that I've done in my life, why would God die for me? And I feel like in perfect timing, he starts reading out of Hebrews 12. And he talks about how Jesus, it was with joy set before him, he endured the cross. So he was perfect in every way. So of course he was obedient to the Father. But he loved me. And I felt that in my bones. I felt his love radiate into and pierce my heart. And I knew it all to be true. And I relinquished my life of feeling like I wasn't good enough, because God in flesh came into this world and died so that I could be reconciled to God. So I surrendered my life, and I've been following Jesus since then. And the girl that we went on that walk, her name is Hope, and she's my wife. And we've been married for almost 8 years, and we've got 4 boys. And it's just been an incredible journey. And I just remember, I'm all in my feels. I'll just stay here. But I remember when our first son was born. Again, I didn't know how to be a dad. I hadn't been around kids. I didn't, I was anxious and nervous. And I remember he was born, and the nurse was wiping him off, and he was all slimy and whatnot. And she said, you can come, you can touch him. And I reached my hand over in his direction, and he grabs my finger. Mm. And I feel God whisper in my spirit that I love you more than that. And how right now you feel like you've only, been in the presence of this child for moments, and you would die for him gladly. It's the same way Jesus feels about you. And I understood what it meant to be a father through becoming a son. And we named him Canon because Canon in Hebrew means measuring stick. So it's the measure of God's grace to us. Is why we chose that name. And it's been quite a ride over the last 8 years. But with the same intentionality that I pursued sin and lived in brokenness, I pursued Jesus. So 3 days after I, gave my life to Christ, I go to this church. I'm like, hey, I've got a story. And I share it with a pastor, and he sits with me, and he introduces me to another pastor, and he starts reading the Bible with me and teaching me how to read it. And we meet together, and he disciples me for several hours a week for about 3 years. And then I fall in love with the Bible because Jesus saved my life, but the Bible in a practical way, like understanding it and learning it and applying it to my life, changed my life. And I just fell in love with it to the point where I wanted to know it so that I could share it. And I go to Liberty, study Christian ministries, and get a degree there. And through that process, God's done some really amazing things. And I've been on staff at a few churches and been able to preach the gospel literally all over the world. And
what is it like? I mean, that morning where you're in church with your crush, who you're kind of blown away by the way she responds to you. You've been honest with her, unlike you've been honest with anyone before, and you're hearing the gospel. You're hearing the gospel in a way for the first time. I mean, it sounds like you'd kind of been familiar around it as a kid, but like in a way it really speaks to you, and you know God loves you. You feel it, like you said. When you left the church, were you on cloud nine, or were there also like, okay, now what do I do with all this life I've lived before? What were you experiencing?
I just felt free. I felt free, and I felt like it was like for me, just who I am. Whenever I experience something that is enjoyable or life-giving to me, my natural personality is want to give it away to others. And that's not a coincidence. Like, God has wired us all to disciple those. So it's like you've been forgiven much so that you can display his forgiveness. We're ambassadors. We're carriers of that word of reconciliation. So for me, just thinking back, my grandma's buttermilk biscuits, like I could smell them like right now, and I get just like, it's super nostalgic, but I would always I'm like, man, you have to try this. It's amazing. I want you to have that. So the first thing that I was thinking was like, gosh, the weight that I've been carrying my entire life is gone.
Wow.
And I need to tell everyone about this.
Well, and you've been doing that methodically with your ministry. Now you have a media business. Like, you're methodically doing that, telling everyone, not just your story, but the truth about life and God and marriage and these things. Did you turn around and start telling your old friends in the industry? Like, did you communicate with them after?
Yeah, so I mean,
after that experience? And
so I think there was like really wise counsel in my life that prevented me from doing that too soon, because there was a season where it was unhealthy for me to be exposed to that environment. So I really had to take it. I went through a season of like really gleaning. Like, there was a season of like, okay, let's take inventory of everything in your life, and if it doesn't align with the way that you're going, at least for a season, let's remove it.
EveryLife.com is America's pro-life baby product company. Diapers and wipes, which are ethically sourced, high-quality products from a company that supports your pro-life values and donates back to the pro-life movement. I love EveryLife.com. This is the company. If you're listening, you've got a baby in your life, you've got a niece or nephew, you've got a kid, this is the company to use the diapers and wipes from. You can go to EveryLife.com today. You can order a trial package, or you can order a subscription. Again, fantastic quality, ethically sourced. Is going to be great for your little one. EveryLife.com, and you can use the code Lila at checkout for 10% off your order. That's EveryLife.com and Lila at checkout for 10% off your order. So it sounds like you had spiritual pastors who were mentoring you.
Yeah.
Did you also talk to like therapists?
Yeah. Yeah, I went to therapy. I
You did the whole thing because you're like, it's like a cleansing. Like, I mean,
but for me,
a restoration process.
100%. But for me, it's so beautiful because like Jesus is Lord over everything, even TikTok, like like everything, and He redeems all things for His glory.
It's true.
So,
and the glory is greater. He can show His glory even greater through the greatest of sins and faults.
Certainly,
like that's just His power is even more beautifully manifest.
Yeah, like it's made perfect in your weakness.
Yeah,
like His perfect power, His perfect strength is made perfect in your weakness. But like for me, just thinking about like I think this is a really beautiful thing to kind of examine, because when someone is without God, they still have these like attributes, their personalities, their giftings. Like most certainly, there are certain things that are unlocked that Galatians 5. 22 and 23 talk about like the gifts of the Holy Spirit, but there's certain attributes that you have with your personality, what you're good at, like logistically where you are, like your uniqueness.
Your talents. I mean, it's crazy because God gives talents freely.
Yeah.
We can use them for ill.
Yeah.
And you see that in the world today. You see people in media and politics and everything else, business, using talents incredibly, but ultimately for ill.
100%.
And you had a ton of talent, and now it's like, okay,
let's
reshape all this towards
and like
all this other potential.
And the thing that He repurposed in my life that was very healthy was that as an athlete, I knew that constructive criticism allowed me to get better. As an actor, I knew constructive criticism allowed me to get better. As a communicator, I knew that constructive criticism allowed me to be better. As a follower of Jesus, I knew that I wanted someone to see what I had on my back. I wanted to see where am I walking in such a way that doesn't align with the character of Christ. Because if my objective is to imitate Christ and become more like Him on a daily basis, I need people seeing me differently than I see myself, because I can't see myself, because I see myself through a faulty lens sometimes. So that's the beauty of community. That's the beauty of church.
So with your relationship with Hope, how long from that, first, second date at church where your whole life changes till you walking up to the altar?
Yeah, so...
what was that journey like?
Ironically, it was Easter when we went on that walk. I proposed in October.
Quick.
And then we got married the following July.
Amazing. So within a little over a year.
Yeah.
And what was the process like? I think a lot of people listening may be wondering, okay, you have this extensive other life.
Yeah.
In pornography. And then before that, you mentioned you were living in a promiscuous way. Yeah. You're now with this Christian girl, who just completely captivates you.
Yeah.
And you're wanting to do a full 180. You have done a 180. God has done something in your heart, in your life. Were there kind of natural struggles that you were having, trauma and attachments? I don't know. Yeah. What can you share with folks listening? Because I think there's a tendency, sometimes with these incredible stories of testimony like yours, where there's it goes from black to white kind of thing.
Yeah.
Darkness to light. And then people listening are like, okay, yeah, but my story's more complicated. Right. I chose light from the dark I was in, and then I fell back into dark, and then I tried again, and I'm mostly in the light, but I fall into dark. So it's like an ongoing, and I still wrestle with these thoughts or these feelings. And yes, of course, Jesus frees me. He's freed me. Yeah. Ultimately. Yeah. But in the real life experience of my flesh, I have my struggles.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like St. Paul's thorn in his side that he says.
So Romans 7.
And he says, I'm not too elated. The Lord allows me this thorn in my side so that I don't become too elated.
Yeah. And just that whole idea around Christian liberty. Christian liberty is not I can do whatever I want.
Of course.
It's I have the power to say no to what I should not do.
Yes.
That I might want to do. But
so what were if you can share temptations or struggles you had?
Well, I mean, just the reality of I had sex with thousands of people prior to this, and now sex wasn't on the table. It wasn't an option, But I think that's the beauty of Proverbs 27:17. Iron sharpens iron, as one man sharpens another. So it's her commitment to follow Jesus and my commitment to follow Jesus. They were both independent and collective. So we were independently committed to following Jesus, and we were committed to collectively following Jesus. So like we didn't hook up, not because I didn't want to hook up, it just wasn't an option. And then like her being honest with people in front of me was so healing. Like I remember someone asking her, hey, I'm in a situation where I've been dating someone, but they have a very promiscuous past. Like, how do you not like hold that against them? How do you not measure yourself against like other people? Like, how do you do that? She's like, well, I believe God's word to be true. So if 2 Corinthians 5:17 says that he is a new creation, that old person is gone, that person was dead and he's alive. And what I won't do is, Romans 12:2 talks about it. You're either being conformed by the world or you're being transformed by the renewing of your mind. We're going through this metamorphosis when we choose to follow Jesus. And at the end of that verse 2, it talks about how you can see what is God's pleasing and perfect will. So if I see things through that lens, what she was able to say is, I'm not going to allow Satan to determine how I see him. I'm not going to look at him through the world's lens. So what he did may be true, and he's still walking through some of the trauma of that because he had a wound, but now he has a scar, and that scar is relatively new. But I'm not going to project what Satan says about him onto him. I'm going to project what Jesus says about him. And her responding in that way, it was both healing for me and it strengthened my faith. So having people in my life like that, and I had this guy who loved me, but he loved me really well. And what love looks like is not always like hunky-dory. Sometimes like you need a kick in the butt often, and that's what I needed. I needed someone that loved me enough to tell me the truth. And I was committed to our relationship. So every Friday we had what we called hot conversations, honest, open, and transparent.
Good.
Honest, open, and transparent. And he asked me, what's your thought life like? How much time are you spending in the Bible? Like, what are some of the things you're doing that you know are not good? And I could say, I'm good, man. Or I could be honest, because I knew when I was honest, I took what was in the dark and I brought it into the light, and it lost power. And that's the beauty of me telling my story, because either what is true is either your story has power over you, but when you put it at the foot of the cross, it loses its power over you because you don't own it anymore. It's now a story about Jesus.
I think the key that is, I've heard this from other stories, and it's true in my life too, is that the commitment that you had to radical transparency and honesty, like the HOT.
Yeah.
What was it?
Honest,
Honesty, open, transparent.
Yeah.
Weekly.
Yeah, and
with someone who can hold you accountable.
We still do that.
As a married man, you're still doing that.
Yeah.
That combination with God's unconditional love, with practical stuff. You said you're in therapy. You're in mentorship. You're doing, obviously trying to like live this certain way, this new way.
Yeah.
Like that combination, like that. I think that should just give hope to anyone listening.
Yeah, and it wasn't easy. Yeah. It was hard, and I did some stupid stuff along the way that my wife was really gracious about. I had a lot of I didn't have like a mental breakdown, but there were as God progressively consecrated me, there were things that he brought to the surface that he knew that I was ready to deal with, that he dealt with. But I mean, that's why like conviction from the Spirit is an opportunity to have a deeper healing.
But was fidelity challenging?
It wasn't. Because for me, for me, it was like that meant death. And honestly, I'd never experienced love. Like I'd never experienced. So a lot of people ask me like, how can you be satisfied with
a woman before?
Like God, I had never experienced love before. And when you experience the thing that your heart was made to experience, you're satisfied. So I experienced love for the first time, and it doesn't even hold a candle. Like lust can't even hold a handle to love, because lust, it's this instantaneous gratification that's wired around being spontaneous in a selfish way, and it's just like you're just reacting, and it has nothing to do with all the things that Corinthians talks about in that description of love, being patient, kind, long suffering. Persevering, self-control, like all those things. Like that's what love is. And when I experienced love for the first time, it healed me, but also it's like, gosh, I'm so satisfied by this. Why would I ever want to go back to this? And that's the beauty of, just walking with God, staying in the Word. It's like when you become satiated by the Word of God, satisfied spending with the person of God, you don't desire the things that you used to desire anymore because you see them for what they are. Mm. They're empty. They lead to brokenness. For me, like I see that and I know that it leads to pain. Mm. And I see this and it's like, gosh, like this is so much better.
There's some people listening who maybe because of the past that they have, they're living in shame. Or there's also some people, and I've talked to some of these folks, and there's also a whole kind of movement online of this sort of idea that if you've fallen, especially if you're a woman, I think there's sometimes a double standard of like men are maybe more naturally, driven towards sex without commitment. This is one theory. Sure. I think we are all sexual beings that have temptations, but so anyways, if a woman loses her virginity or if a woman is involved in pornography, in a way, it's harder for her to come back from that.
Yeah, and I think
than if a man is.
Yeah, and I think that's because we don't have a right view of people. I would say that would point to the same reason that we're not calling babies. We're calling them fetuses because it distracts you from the reality of what is true. That's why we're calling pornography adult content. That's why we're not calling adultery. We're calling it, just being single or me, having fun. So I would say, like, gosh, if we see people rightly, we will value them rightly. If we see love rightly, we will value love rightly. And just what is true in all of that is that I think Western society and just the world in as a whole, we've made sex an idol. I mean, that goes back to church history. When you look at Corinth, you look at Ephesus, it's been true since the beginning of time. But it's because we put sex on a pedestal and we've worshipped it. We see it in the way that we do. If that makes sense.
It's almost like we both worship it and then we also degrade it.
Well, yeah.
Contradiction in how we live.
Yeah, it's like well, anything that you worship outside of God that's the Bible calls that an idol. And when you worship anything other than God, you see everything else wrongly. So if I don't see sex for what it is, and if I don't see, a human being for who they are, then of course I'm going to see people as products and I'm going to use them. I'm going to see sex as transactional because I'm owed sex, because it's something I need, and a want and a need is drastically different.
So this is really controversial, I think, for some folks, but I was talking to a young woman sometime in the last year or so, and she was sharing with me, that's kind of happens occasionally. I'm kind of hearing people's stories. And she's sharing about how she was dating this guy who's Christian, at least, and how he, said he lived his life and stuff.
Identified it.
Yeah, and she had, not a super promiscuous past, but she had slept before with, before her own conversion, 1 or 2 or 3 guys. So she had this in her past, and, he really wrestled with that. He really struggled with that because they were talking about getting married. And eventually he just couldn't do it. He was like, I can't do it. I'm sorry. Although I think part of the pain, the special pain for her was it wasn't even a full I'm sorry. It was more like, you're not good enough. That was the message to her. And I think, I hear this sometimes, and I don't think it's wrong for a man or a woman to hope for, especially if they've pursued virginity themselves, to hope for that in a future spouse. Like, it's not a bad desire.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what's your take on that?
I would say that, Christian culture as a whole has made virginity an idol. And when in God's eyes, virginity is not something that he upholds, because someone can be a virgin and be unpure, and someone can be walking in purity and have slept with 1,000 people. Purity is about reflection, the posture of your heart. Purity is about how God sees you based on how you're walking with him, because God judges us, regarding to our heart. If Jesus is saying, hey, you've heard it said that, you shouldn't commit adultery. I'm saying to you, if you even think about a woman in that way, you've committed adultery. So that's the standard that Jesus holds. So if that's the standard, we're looking at the wrong metric, because what we do in the practicality of us not doing something doesn't make us holy. Like Titus 2, verses 11 through 14 talks about by choosing to say no to ungodliness, that allows us to see what is, the life that God has designed us to live, this purity that we can have, this desire to do to do things God's way. So it's like, it's not me, I think we focus on more like behavior restriction and behavior modification in contrast to like character development. And character development is about your heart.
In the Catholic teaching, I think, as I've shared, I'm Catholic, but there's this incredible, it was very eye-opening when I started to understand it, that, someone going and sleeping with someone else, premarital sex or adultery or any sexual act, including like a sexual act with yourself, like masturbation, are sins, are both sins, grave matter, both separate you from God. And it's not like, it's a little bit less of a sin to masturbate than it is to go and sleep with someone. And so that's to your point about virginity, though, because I think, it's this technical, I'm a technical virgin. And it's not that the Lord, there are consecrated virgins, I think in the church, there's something beautiful about consecrating one's life. But to your point, this distinction, because if someone's, been sexually violated, been raped, are they a virgin, right? The point that you're making is, and I think it's such an incredibly important point, is that at the end of the day, it's about what is the choice of your heart.
Yeah.
What are you choosing in your heart or in your mind? And you can commit sexual sin by yourself.
Yeah.
And you can also have, technically not be a virgin and have not committed a sin because you were violated or you had an ignorance or a trauma that prevented that from being a full choice that you made.
Yeah. Gosh, I just want to like take you with me everywhere I go, because honestly, there's so many large churches that I speak in, and if you're listening to this, I love you, but I disagree with you. That they would say, because the Bible doesn't explicitly say that masturbation is sin, I would not call it sin.
Wow.
But I would say, man, we're called to take all the scriptures. There's this concept, perspicuity, where none of the Bible is beyond our understanding. We just need to dig for context. So through contextualization and understanding concepts, we can see that I'm not wired to have a relationship with my hand. Mm-hmm. That is contradictory of who I'm called to be. We're called to exhibit self-control. The Bible says, you're free to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. You're free to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. You're to be mastered by nothing, right? If I'm not to be mastered by anything, who am I called to be? Romans 12, I'm called to be a living sacrifice. Galatians 2, my body is not my own. My body is a dwelling of the Holy Spirit. So if that's who I am, and sex is supposed to be, Ephesians 5, it talks about how, the marriage between a husband and a wife is a symbol of Christ in the church. If that's the level of purity that we're talking about, please tell me how you can justify you giving into self-gratification where it's pleasure and it's sex, but it's outside of marriage. How is that not sin? How is that not sin? Of course it is. And we keep lying to ourselves. And that's why we stay stuck in brokenness. That's why, pornography is $100 billion industry, because we've normalized things that we shouldn't, and conversations that we should be having, we don't. And if you don't have them, guess what? The world is screaming about them, and we're being conformed by the world.
There is a really famous book by Dr. James Dobson, who I think has done amazing work. But in this book, it's about boys, this book on boys. And there's a chapter or a passage about masturbation. And basically, he says, I agree, you shouldn't shame your child. You shouldn't, but you shouldn't also say that they shouldn't feel shame for it. And basically, he's saying it's not that big of a deal. And I think that, back to the misconception you point to in some churches, we have these certain lines we draw. And I think another line we draw about even in marriage is like, well, anything goes in marriage.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, there's chastity applies in marriage too.
Sure.
Like we should treat our spouse with respect. And I do think too, again, looking back before the Reformation or even at the Reformation, there was a universal rejection of birth control, even in marriage.
Yeah.
Because it's saying the sexual act, the way that you're designed by God, your sexual parts, yes, for pleasure and a marriage exclusively, lifelong commitment, and openness to life. So if you frustrate that artificially, it's the same issue of just frustrating God's design.
Yeah. And
similarly, masturbation. But I think these things are very controversial, even for some Christians today.
And they shouldn't be controversial, but like to your point, what we've done, again, I mean, like the fetus, a human child, a baby, a fetus, euthanasia, self-assisted, whatever.
Physician-assisted death or whatever.
I mean, like these concepts, we're using euphemisms to deflect what is reality.
You're right, because the reality is like you can bring life into the world. Sex does that. Not every time.
Yeah.
But when you frustrate
it has the
sex,
potential for that.
Yeah, but if you frustrate sex designed for that in its moment for that, or you frustrate its design for intimacy because it's not in a lifelong marriage where there's commitment and love and before God and in your community, then you're living in an unreality. And so many people struggle with that today.
Yeah, I mean, and we have the data that tells us what happens within a woman's body when there is the potential for life, and then there's contraception. What happens? We know that, and then because of data, we know the neuroscience that goes along with what does pornography do to the brain.
Right.
And we know the data is real, and it's I love I've had the opportunity to speak at a few congressional briefings over the last few years, and just hey, here's the burden of proof, here's personal testimony, and here's what is actually happening. And
so, okay, I know we've only got a little bit of time left, but some key things. What do you think is porn is proliferating? OnlyFans is proliferating. All of these things, now it's like your average high school boy in most schools. It's like porn. There's not even shame associated with it. And then many of your average high school girls, like if not playing, or college girls playing around with OnlyFans, it's like showing yourself in a promiscuous way. It's just so normalized.
Yeah.
It's so normalized. What is the end game solution? How do we get to the end game of changing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to have real conversations earlier, often, and just the way that OnlyFans work is like, especially people who are earning at a high capacity. But here's the reality: it's catfishing 2.0. Like there's stock footage, and the person that you think you're messaging with to have those conversations, it's either AI or it's a person in a basement. It's a
dude in a basement.
It's a sweaty dude in a basement that is playing Fortnite,
getting $9.99 a month for it's crazy.
But that's what's true. But at the same time, we can't believe that you can do that and it not cost you something.
I think that's been the biggest thing I've seen is this insistence. It doesn't cost me. Like back to the Whatever podcast that I've done a few times recently, which you should go on, Josh. Joshua,
I actually had a conversation with them.
Okay. You're not sure if it was your calling, but I mean, it's amazing though. It's an amazing experience of seeing people really wrestling in live time. Like that's the power of it, the rawness and the willingness for people to be transparent, many of them. And I think there's so much power to that. But, so many people live in the lie of like, this does not, I choose this, it's good money, this does not really affect me or my future. I'm going to be a mom and a wife one day. I'm going to, after make my bag or whatever, I'm going to retire and I'm going to have my family of my dreams and you can't tell me nothing. Like that's
but at the same time, so regardless of who you are, where you are in life, what you believe, what is true across the board, that God loves you and wants a relationship with you. And what happened, it cost you something to receive the price that was paid. Jesus laid down his life for you. And a rational, reasonable response is for you to lay down your life for him. And what that teaches us is that anything that's worth anything will always cost something. And we can't look at something as beautiful as sex that has the power to create life and think that we can misuse it, and at the same time believe that we can misuse it and it not cause pain, not cause trauma. Not only to you, it causes collateral damage. Because if you think you can do that, the way the internet works, the way how people are so malicious, because broken people, like hurt people will hurt people. That's just true. So the fact that like you're going to have that content out there, and that's going to be ammunition for someone to use against you and the people that you love most, because that's happened in my life. I mean, my wife has not deserved, people to send her pictures of me doing things. My wife has not deserved for people to send. We opened a gym together, and people plaster stuff all over our
Who are these
Facebook.
people?
Well, we have their IP addresses,
But are they like the pharisaical types? Like, how dare you? Or are they people in the industry who are mad at you? Like,
no.
Are they just weirdos?
Well, when I left the industry put out, well, I'll say two things about the industry. So when I left the industry, there were several articles that were written that he left because he had HIV. Because
do you have HIV?
I don't. But what was crazy is that it was just hard to reconcile. Well, he's having success. Like, why would he leave?
Like, they hate that you are happily married, have kids.
Or just even back then, it's like, why would you leave?
Oh, I see.
Like, outside of dying, like, why would you leave the industry upon your own volition because you were successful? It's one thing to like not be able to make it or to like be successful and then you die out, but like at essentially a pinnacle of your career, why would you leave?
Well, you broke their narrative.
Right.
You broke their narrative that this is good and sustainable and normal.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
And I would say at the same time, to show like how vile and evil the industry is, 100% of the time when someone that I loved would die of suicide or overdose, what the industry would do is they would make a compilation of all their films in honor of them, which is pointing to the pain that led to them taking their life, and they would monetize off of their death.
Wow. That's so dark. That's so dark.
And that's their playbook over and over and over again. Like, don't you think that there were like stuff made about me, like, making fun of me because I was I become a Christian and that I was preaching? It's like, I get berated about that all the time. But at the same time, I don't expect the world to do anything but act like the world. I expect that. But at the same time, there are Christians that see some of the things that I'm doing, and because they're living in secret sin, sometimes they say and do things that actually hurt not just my witness, but the witness of the church.
How do you respond to that?
In love. I again
move forward.
Yeah, but I mean, what is true is that's why I talk about the pornography industry so much, because I think that the gap in, I would say in Western culture has a discipleship problem.
It's so true. I mean, I think one of the things that has spoken to me so much about our conversation, Joshua, is that you had this, thanks be to God, opportunity for discipleship, this plug-in community opportunity. You met the love of your life who extended you this grace and kind of helps God use her as this beautiful instrument. And then you had these people that came alongside you. And I think so many people today are adrift, especially men, but men and women, looking for mentors, looking for support. Like, they're looking for something. They go to the internet.
Yeah.
They maybe watch YouTube videos, they have maybe some family member or some uncle or somebody, but people are starving.
Yeah.
They don't even know fully what they starve for, but they really are starving for that community, not just a community to hang out with, but to help them grow.
Yeah. Well, because it's the thing that God has designed us to do.
Yeah.
And I would say that the discipleship gap that we have is a byproduct of the integrity gap that we have. $100 billion industry, fueled by viewership. Disney, $67 billion last year. NFL, $11 billion. Major League Baseball, $10 billion. NBA, $10 billion. So $99 billion, still $1 billion short of what porn did last year.
Wow.
So thinking about that,
it's crazy.
That is how much porn is being watched, and that's how profitable it is. 33% of all the data transferred on the internet on a daily basis is porn. 56% of divorces have something to do with porn. Either porn is the problem or it led to physical infidelity. So it's destroying us. But people, I believe, my greatest hope for next year is I want to see 1 million people who identify as followers of Jesus confess that porn is a problem to someone, repent, right? So repentance, logistical terminology, 180-degree turn. I'm going to turn away from the thing that I know that's not good for me. I'm going to move away from it and towards something better, which is God and community. So 1 million people, imagine 1 million people not living in secret sin, but pursuing the life that God has for them. And what that looks like is the gospel actually being shared, people actually being discipled, families actually being restored, people actually following Jesus and, speaking out on issues. Like, why do men not talk about abortion? Because more often than not, they're living in sin. So the thing that's leading to abortion, there's some kind of practicality that's attached to the spiritual element that comes with struggling with pornography. I think there's a direct correlation in many of the issues that we have, like talking about serving the least and the lowest. Like, why would you do the things that God has called you to do that always cost you something when you're spending your equity in a place that is empty and it's leading to death? And shame and guilt will always keep you stuck. So I think...
And how can you feel like I can walk in God's grace to be a countercultural voice, like warrior in whatever way my talents have been given me, but I'm living with this compromise that I keep falling into.
Yeah, I think there's this Hebrew word, anavah. So anavah is the Hebrew word in which we get humility from. And it's describing this totality of both courage and humility. And I need courage to step into this God-ordained space for me individually. Individually, we each have this God-ordained space where God's gifts and talents aligns with His purpose for us in our life. And we have to have the humility not to step out of it, but the courage to step in it. And the boldness that comes with you walking in the Spirit is I have to be living in purity. Because if I'm not living in purity, John 10:10 talks about how the enemy wants to steal, kill, and destroy. He's stealing our boldness. He's killing our calling. He's robbing us of the joy that comes with the fulfillment that's only found in walking in alignment with Christ. So there's going to be no boldness without purity, because I think they function hand in hand.
I love that mission. I get 1 million people to come clean, change their life.
Yeah, because that's how,
on pornography. That's because men and women are affected today. Very young people are affected today. Married people are affected today. So many. What else? That's a huge goal right there, and I think you're going to do it. And I'd love to help in whatever way I can. What do you see like your calling in life? Your long-term. What is your long-term life goal right now?
Yeah, I would say, I love sharing my story. But the thing that I love most is just preaching the gospel. So I think God has given me a unique voice and a unique time to preach the gospel in a unique way. And what I'm really seeing is, I think, how do, there's 5.5 billion people that would say that, they are not following Jesus, or we know that are unreached. So how did the 2.5 reach the 5.5? And it's, you got to activate the 2.5. And so for me, I just want to spend my life preaching the gospel to the church, like equipping the church for the works of the ministry. And I never thought that would have been the case, because I thought I have a more of like an evangelistic gift than necessarily a teaching gift. But I think like that is how we reach the lost. We reach the lost with those who know. So that's what I want to do with my life. Yeah. So,
awesome.
Probably 5 years ago, I would say I want to see like pornography eradicated, and I do. But the reality is sexual immorality will always exist. But the thing that I care about most is not, porn being eradicated. Is that every single person hears that Jesus came into this world. He lived a perfect life. He died so that you could be reconciled to God if you put your faith in Him.
And it's the worldview that comes with our faith about the dignity of the person, the truth about sex, the beauty of marriage, the value of the child in the womb and every child.
Yeah.
That worldview is necessary. If we're going to eradicate porn, you need to help share the good news, the capital G good news of Jesus, and then the whole kingdom of how he teaches us to live.
Yeah, and I would just say
that moral plan that brings so much freedom.
Yeah, and I would just say, and to the person that is struggling with guilt and shame, like guilt and shame are from the enemy. And regardless of you lived the life that I lived, or you've had an abortion, or whatever that might be, whatever the thing that is that keeps you trapped, it seems unmentionable. When you mention it, it loses its power over you. And there's healing to be found, because the cross is more than sufficient than whatever it is. And God will not even, he will not only redeem and restore you, he will use your story for his glory, because there's someone hurting in this world that needs to know that there's forgiveness to be found, there's healing to be found, and there's life to be lived after the fact that you did the thing that you said you would never do, or the unmentionable thing that happened to you. Regardless of what it is, there's more than enough healing available to you because of who Jesus is.
Amen. Would you have ever thought 15 years ago, in some of the darker moments, or whatever it was 12 years ago, you'd be where you are today, walking in with God, with a wife, 4 kids, leading what you're leading?
I would say literally the day that I was going to take my life, I made a list. I'll never contribute to society in a way where I can lead, because leadership is the thing I love most. I'll never be a father. I'll never get married. And I look back, Ephesians 3:20 talks about like God stands ready to do exceedingly abundantly more than you could ever hope or imagine. So I didn't even have the guts to dream about the life that I have today.
Wow.
And
it's awesome. Thank you, Joshua.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Lila Rose podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Joshua Broome. As always, do not forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Also, we're at, I think, 1,600 reviews on Apple. We want to get to 2,000, so don't forget to leave us a review and give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to ring the notification bell so that you never miss an episode of the show. And we look forward to seeing you next time.